Welcome to Average Joe's Pool. We get a lot of requests to review various pool equipment from various brands. But there's one brand that we just keep getting inundated with. Please review it, please review it. Well, here it is. Welcome to the world of Rhino Nebula 2. So the model that we're featuring in this review is the Nebula 2 by Rhino. And these cues have been kindly supplied to us direct from Rhino for review. And Rhino have also been kind enough to supply us with a range of their additional models and also their shafts for testing as well. And we'll be doing those in separate videos. If you haven't already subscribed and switched on notifications, now's the time to do so. So first of all, who are Rhino? Well, Rhino are a relative newcomer to the world of pool. And they're probably best known for their low-cost carbon fiber shafts and carbon fiber shafted pool cues, just like we have here. And Rhino are actually a Vietnamese company, so yes, you guessed it right, their products are manufactured in Vietnam. And so the model that we have for this video is the Nebula 2, and you might be wondering, why do you have two of them? Well, this particular model is actually currently available in 11 different colours, and we actually wanted a nice bright one for the review, and so we chose the golden colour. However, Rhino were also very keen to showcase their most popular colour, which is the metallic silver. And so we're actually going to be reviewing the gold one. However, we will be showing you footage and close-ups of both of these so you can get an idea of what this cue looks like in different colours. And without doubt, the biggest feature when it comes to the Nebula 2 is the fact that it comes with a carbon fibre shaft. Now, when it comes to buying a Nebula 2, there's only actually one weight option available, and Rhino say that this cue should come in between 18.7 and 19.5 ounces. However, if you do want a little bit more weight to your cue, then Rhino do sell separately a range of the weight bolts in various different weights. And when it comes to options on the Nebula 2, as I mentioned, 11 different colours available. But from a technical standpoint, we have something a little bit more important. This does come with a choice of two tip diameters, either 12.4mm or 12.8. And all Rhino cues are supplied with a limited lifetime warranty. If you want more information on that, please take a look at the Rhino website. Now, when it comes to pricing on the Nebula 2, this of course is one of Rhino's strong points. We have a carbon fiber shafted cue, and the retail price on this is just $299. However, it's definitely worth pointing out that there are regular sales and promotions, and so realistically you should be able to pick one of these up for around $20 or maybe $30 under that price. And if you're interested in buying yourself a Rhino cue, we will be adding Amazon links into the video description for you. So this video turns out to be helpful for you, please can we ask in return, please help to support us, please click those Amazon links. So we've nailed down some of the basics for the Nebula 2, but you want to know a little bit more, right? Let's take a look at the spec check.
I've kept my side of bargain. You're drinking up on my ale for 3 men.
So first up, when it comes to packaging, the packaging on these Rhinos is actually extremely good. They do come in a full retail box, which comes completely shrink wrapped. And once you're inside the box, the cue itself does come in a clear poly bag, and you'll also notice that it does come complete with a pair of joint protectors. So when it comes to design, as we can see, the Nebula 2 comes in a metallic paint job, complete with a Nebula 2 logo, and we also have this quite distinct bumpy grip design. And Rhino call this a 3D friction grip, and that's precisely what it is. Each of these little black sections is ever so slightly raised. Now, whilst we're focusing on the butt side of this cue, there is one elephant in the room that certainly needs to be addressed. And that is the simple fact that the butts on Rhino cues are not actually made from wood. These are made entirely from carbon composite. Now, that simple fact that the butts are not actually made of wood could well be a deal breaker for some people. But it's important to remember, of course, that we are living in an age where new materials are appearing all the time. We have to remember that a lot of players are now moving towards these carbon fibre shafts, moving away from the more traditional maple shafts. And likewise, when it comes to the butts, we're now starting to see butts that are made of solid carbon fibre, mainly on brake cues at the moment, but various other materials including these composites. And although wood is definitely the preferred traditional material when it comes to butts. Maybe in 10 or 20 years time, maybe it won't be. Maybe all players will have moved across into some kind of artificial material. Now of course that doesn't mean that what we have here with Rhino's particular carbon composite is the future of pool cues, but it's certainly going to be interesting to give it a good test. Now at this stage in our review we'd also give you an overview of the various components around the cue, but as we can see this is actually extremely simple. The entire butt is a single piece, we don't have any collars, any decorative rings, there's no butt cap, it's literally a single section. However, as you may well expect, we do have a rubber bumper on the end and that does come complete with the Rhino logo. And speaking of logos, we do have the Rhino logo right at the very tip of the butt. And then additionally, of course, we do have the Nebula 2 logo design in the centre. And then finally, we do also have the Rhino logo that's engraved into the base of the carbon fibre shaft. And the joint that we have here on the Nebula 2 is a 3/8 by 8. And then working our way up the cue, we move on to what Rhino are probably most well known for, and that is their carbon fibre shaft. So this is a genuine carbon fibre shaft with a fairly extreme pro taper profile. Now moving our way down to the end of the cue, we have a very small white ferrule measured in at just 3mm in length. In front of that we have a clear pad, and in front of that we have the brand new time crystal tip. Now, it's worth mentioning this is a brand new feature for Rhino's cues. They did used to come with standard leather tips. However, they've now changed that. They have their own brand of tip, the Time Crystal. And this is not actually a leather tip. This is made from microfiber and it has 10 compressed layers. And the version that we have here, this is the 12.8mm shaft. And our tip measured in a fraction under that, 12.72mm. Now when it comes to length, what we have here with most of Rhino's cues is a slightly longer cue than you might normally expect, standard length being 58 inches. Rhino's cues are 59. Now the main reason for that being that the shafts that come as standard from Rhino aren't the traditional 29 inches, they are 30-inch shafts. And when we measured the overall length of the Nebula 2, it came in at 59 3/16 inches. However, if we deduct from that both the tip and the rubber bumper, the overall length is 58 5/8 inches. And our overall cue length comprised of a shaft length came in bang on 30 inches, which leaves us with a butt length of 29 3/16 including our rubber bumper. And moving on to diameters, our diameter at the end of the butt 32.02mm and our diameter at the shaft 21.65mm. And with regards to weight, the Nebula 2 really comes in normally around 19 ounces, remembering that Rhino say it should be between 18.7 and 19.5. And when we weighed ours in, we had a total weight of 19.145 ounces. And that comprised of a butt weight of 15.205 ounces, plus a shaft weight of 3.945 ounces. And as usual for our cue reviews, we do like to remove the rubber bumper and have a look what's going on the inside. And for the Nebula 2 with the bumper removed, we can definitely see the composite construction, coupled with the fact that, as expected, we do not have a weight bolt in this particular cue. But do remember, if you do want to add additional weight to your cue, you can buy the weight bolt separately from Rhino. And we also tested this cue for the centre of balance and came back at 19 5/8 inches, which places it a good few inches in front of our grip. So now we know all there is to know about the Nebula 2, but of course we need to actually test this cue. So let's make a start. Test 1, straightness. So for test number 1, we'll be looking at straightness. And as well as a basic visual inspection, we have 3 straightness tests. And first up is our simple table roll test. And unfortunately, this test is deemed not viable for the Nebula 2 because of its 3D bumpy grip. So we're going to move straight on to test number 2, the rail roll test. And for this test, we roll the cue along the solid rail of the table and keep an eye on the tip for wobble. And we can see that we definitely do have a degree of nodding visible at the tip. So let's investigate this further with the toughest of our tests and get the cue onto the ball-bearing cue rollers. And now we can see the wobble isolated and in more detail. And we definitely do have a small amount of wobble present in this cue, which means that not everything is 100% perfectly straight or aligned. And whilst this is a small amount of wobble that we're seeing, we do have to remember that not only is this a $300 cue, but also that this has both a carbon fibre shaft and a carbon composite butt, making it highly resistant to warpage. So overall the result is okay, but it definitely would have been nice to see the Rhino come in with a better result, remembering what the cue is made of. And so scoring it a very average 2.5 stars out of 5 for straightness.
Let's play a man's game. You know Russian roulette?
So coming up we have play testing, but before that we'll be looking at deflection with our squirt test. And we run this test over a distance of 75 inches, which is the gap between the rear rail and the head spot for a 9-foot table. And we use maximum parallel English coupled with a hard shot. And we'll also be testing for at least 10 shots on both sides to ensure an accurate overall average. And the Nebula 2 had a frankly amazing result of 1 5/8 inches, which is way above average. However, it should also be mentioned that it was particularly difficult to get a steady and consistent result for the Nebula 2, with shots varying by an unusual amount both up and down. And this was experienced on both sides. And so unfortunately, despite the average being excellent, because of the slight inconsistency we experienced during testing, our overall feel was that this test was not the most positive one for the Rhino. So our technical tests are now complete, so we need to move on to the fun stuff, get this onto the table and start playing with it. And all products that we review here at Average Joe's Pool always have a minimum of 5 hours of full use on the table before we formulate an opinion, just to make sure we can give it a fair and accurate review. So is the Nebula 2 going to knock us into the stratosphere? It's time to find out. Let's play. So when it comes down to playing with the Rhino Cue, I've got to say that overall what I had is a very positive experience. There's definitely a lot of positives for this, along with one negative that we're going to cover in just a second. So firstly, focusing on the positives. And one of the major positives when it comes to this cue is definitely the carbon fibre shaft. I really like the finish that we have on this shaft. It really is super smooth. It's almost as smooth through the hand as a maple, perhaps even a touch smoother than some maple shafts. And when you're wearing a glove with this, it really is silky smooth. So when it comes to the shaft side of things, which is a big part and a big feature of the Rhino cues, then definitely what we have here, especially with this lovely pro taper profile, is definitely a winner. However, when it comes to the other end of the cue, the butt side, I wasn't wholly convinced whether I would or wouldn't get on with the fact that what we have here is a carbon composite rather than more traditional wood. Now, firstly, when it comes down to the feel of this butt, to be perfectly honest, of course, it's the same weight. It's covered in a layer of lacquer, just like it would be if it were made from wood. So from that perspective, being honest, you really can't feel the difference between it being carbon composite or wood once it's in the hand, with one possible exception. And that is the simple fact that for some reason, this actually feels a little bit physically warmer in the hand than the equivalent wood butt would. So that's one thing that kind of gives it away when you've got it in your hands. You can tell that it's composite. It just comes down to the temperature of it, which is very slightly different. But as far as the actual feel of it goes, it feels exactly the same as it would if it were a wood butt. Now, of course, it is a very bold decision by Rhino to make their cue butts out of carbon composite rather than the more traditional wood. And that's certainly a factor that could well put a lot of people off. Now, I must say that in my opinion, I don't feel that this carbon composite material has actually degraded the performance of this cue in any way. If anything, it might well offer a slight benefit when matched to this particular shaft. And that brings me to another point that I really liked with this Rhino cue, is the feel of the hit. Now, despite being carbon fibre, this cue doesn't feel too hard, it doesn't feel too stiff, and you don't get that kind of knock or ping noise that you can do with some carbon fibre cues. And that's definitely a big bonus when it comes to the Nebula 2 and performance. And it could well be that the carbon composite butt that we have here is helping to contribute towards that overall feel. And so, as you can tell, the Rhino Nebula 2 definitely has a lot going for it with regards to performance, especially considering how unusual this cue is in the marketplace. And I must say that overall I have enjoyed playing with this cue very much, and I really do like the overall feel of the hit on this particular cue. When it comes down to simple outright performance, there is one key feature to this cue that I simply couldn't quite get on with. And that actually comes down to the tip that we have on this cue, which is the time crystal tip. And I must say, when it comes to this tip, I actually have very much a love-hate relationship with it. When I first saw this tip, I absolutely loved the idea of it. What we have here is a tip that's made from microfiber rather than the more traditional leather. Another bold move from Rhino. And I also love the fact that what we had here is quite an unusual colour with the blue, and it was so well finished from the factory. What we have here is definitely something completely different to what we're used to seeing. So from that perspective, I was definitely very eager to have a good go on this tip, and I had high expectations. And one of the things that I noticed straight away is when I did the first chalking on this tip. And whenever we're testing our products here at Average Joe's Pool, we always use blue master chalk. The reason for that is we do need a standard baseline to work from that remains the same across all products. And when I first chalked up the Nebula 2, I noticed immediately just how thick that chalk was going onto that tip. You could notice straight away that rather than getting a thin dusting as you were rubbing the chalk over that tip, you're almost getting thick stripes of chalk. Now, that in itself is not a big problem, and that did calm down once you've got that first initial chalking done. However, it did become very apparent within the first few minutes of using this cue that it does actually throw up an issue, the fact that that tip is blue. And this hadn't even crossed my mind until I actually started playing with this cue and chalking it up. And the problem we have when we've got a blue tip coupled with blue chalk is you can't actually see the thinner patches of chalk when you're visually looking at that tip. Because of course normally on a leather tip it's going to be brown or perhaps black, and so when you're chalking it up and you look at it, you can see you almost get that kind of slightly camouflage pattern you can see visually the areas where the chalk is a little bit thinner and thicker, and so you can chalk accordingly. But of course with this cue we have a blue tip, so when you visually look at it, it's almost like it's camouflaging those thinner areas of chalk, so you don't really know how chalked up that tip is. Now of course it could be the fact that you don't actually use blue chalk, although blue chalk does tend to be the industry standard colour and most chalks come in blue as standard. But if you're not using blue chalk, then of course you may well have a different experience because that won't apply to you. So that in itself is more of an inconvenience rather than a real problem. However, I did note some issues whilst actually playing with this tip. And what I found for the first couple of hours of playing around with this tip is the behaviour was a little bit unusual, especially when you're trying to push the extremes of English. And I found this to be particularly true when essentially what I was doing is getting a miscue. Now usually when you're playing with a more traditional leather tip and you get a miscue, you get that very distinct conk noise and the cue ball's going to roll off in a strange direction. However, what I found with the Nebula 2 was the behaviour was slightly different. When I'd actually get a miscue, that ball most times would actually end up in the position that you're aiming for, which of course is excellent. And additionally, you wouldn't actually get that very distinct clonk noise that you normally do with a leather tip. And so it's actually quite difficult to know whether you'd actually done a miscue or not, because you're not getting that sound that comes along with it. However, with the Nebula 2, what I noticed is that when you do get a miscue, although you're not getting that noise, the feedback, the feel that you get from that shot is very much different. So you line that shot up, take that shot with quite a lot of English, and the shot would actually go okay, but it wouldn't feel right. And so you'd have to think to yourself, was that a miscue? It felt a little bit strange. And when you look at the tip, you could just about see if you have that little bald spot around the edge. Again, as I mentioned before, it can be a little bit camouflage, but when it was on the edge, you could just about see it. But far more distinctly and more of an issue is when you actually looked at the cue ball. And what I was finding on the cue ball is we're getting those very distinct, super compacted little areas of chalk that you do get with miscues. That you've got to put a little bit of spit on it and really get your nail on it to try and get it off. It's really, really locked on there really, really hard. Now that in itself is not the end of the world, because miscues like that happen regardless of what tip that you're using. However, what I found is it's actually happening quite a lot, and certainly a lot more than I would normally expect. And so the cue ball was constantly getting these little super compacted areas of chalk, ended up being quite annoying. So after spending a couple of frustrating hours with an extremely dirty cue ball, I decided I'm going to reshape the tip a little bit, give it a good scuff with the Willard's tip scuffing tool. And I must say that overall that did improve it, probably by about 75%, although it was still happening occasionally. Again, a little bit annoying. Now there's a couple of things we can actually take away from that. First, the positive is it actually held the shot and made the shot despite actually miscuing, and you wouldn't even know that it miscued apart from the feedback that you get from the shot. So that's very much a positive, because chances are it would make the shot that you might otherwise miss. However, the negative side of that is the simple fact that that was happening far more than I would expect and was leaving that cue ball absolutely filthy. Now one thing to remember is this is specifically using blue master chalk. If you're using a different brand of chalk, chances are you may well have a different experience, but we always use master, so we have that basic baseline that everyone's familiar with. And additionally, I also think that with this particular tip, it is actually going to be quite divisive between players. You may well get some players that actually get on really well with this tip. All depends on your style and your stroke. So I think you're likely to get players that can get on with it and absolutely love it, and you get players that don't get on with it and absolutely hate it. I don't think you're going to get many people that are in that middle ground. I must say for me, unfortunately, if I was keeping this as a playing cue, I would definitely want to be changing that tip. And that really does hurt me a little bit, because I really, really wanted to love this tip. I like new stuff and I like new concepts, and so I was really looking forward to this tip. But after 5-6 hours of play, I'm really not loving it at all. And so that's something just to bear in mind if you are potentially looking at buying yourself one of these Rhino cues that comes with the time crystal tip. It could be a tip that you absolutely fall in love with and changes your game, or you don't get on with it like me. And so just be prepared, if you don't get on with it, then you're going to have to spend that little bit of extra money to get that replacement tip, but hopefully you'll like it. And also from my perspective, I'm far from giving up on the time crystal tip. In fact, I will be testing the Rhino Retro series next that actually has exactly the same tip fitted to it. So I've already put 5 or 6 hours into the Nebula 2. I'll be doing exactly the same with the Retro, so by the end of that process I should have at least 11 to 12 hours of play under my belt, and who knows, maybe my opinion will change after I've done the next 5 to 6 hours. And I must say that overall it is not a bad tip at all. In fact, I've played with leather tips that are certainly much worse than what we have here with the time crystal. So with all that in mind, let's go ahead and score the Nebula 2 for performance. So overall, playing with the Nebula 2 is definitely a very positive experience, with the cue feeling very solid and not too stiff. However, the new time crystal tip left a little to be desired for consistent shots, but it may well suit some players better than others. And so overall, scoring the Nebula 2 a decent 3.5 stars out of 5 for performance.
What is going on? I've never seen you like this before.
Now when it comes to features, our Rhino Nebula 2 basically is nothing but features. Quite literally, when it comes to every single element of this cue, nothing is boring or traditional. What we have here is a fairly groundbreaking product that's absolutely loaded with features from tip to toe. Speaking of which, starting with the tip, of course we have the brand new time crystal tip, complete with that lovely transparent pad behind it. Gives it a really nice look. And then working our way down the cue, of course we have a full carbon fibre shaft with a lovely pro taper profile. And then coming down to our butt, of course what we have here is not a timber construction, this is carbon composite. And our butt comes complete with a full metallic paint job, complete with the Nebula logo, and also we have this 3D friction grip. And then when it comes to the rear of the butt here, although this doesn't come with any weights, this comes as one weight option as standard, it is ready to accept the optional weights if you need them. And then to help really polish things off, it comes in a full retail box and even comes complete with a pair of joint protectors. So when it comes down to the simple factor of features, the Rhino Nebula 2 is truly fully loaded. So let's go ahead and give it its score. So there's no question that when it comes to features, that the Nebula 2 has you well covered. Literally every part of this cue is a feature in itself. And additionally, some of those features are quite groundbreaking in nature. So kudos to Rhino for putting it out there and trying something new and unusual. So when it comes to features, this thing is fully stocked, scoring the Nebula 2 5 stars out of 5 for features. Now when it comes down to quality, it must be said this is absolutely one of Rhino's strongest points. From the very first moment that you get your hands on one of these cues, you notice that they come in that lovely retail packaging, complete with that little cutout, even has that little thumb slot, real attention to detail, and everything super high quality. And then once you've got that cue out of the box and you're giving it a good look over, you're certainly not going to be disappointed. These cues, remember the price that we're paying, really are near flawless. And a couple of things that jumped out at me immediately looking at this cue was just the quality of the finish on the tip and the pad behind it. Again, you literally can't pick fault with it. And even coming down onto the joint here where our socket is placed into the end of the carbon fibre shaft. On some of these cheaper carbon fibre cues that we've seen, what you tend to get is a little bit of kind of leftover glue that's kind of been sanded off around that joint where that socket is placed to the inside of that carbon fibre shaft. Whereas here on the Rhino, you look at it and again, it's absolutely perfect. There's nothing out of place. And then coming down onto our butt, you can see the high quality again. With the quality of the paint, there's no imperfections in it, and all of these logos and kind of features absolutely perfect. You can even follow that right the way down to the end of the cue, take off the rubber bumper on the end there and have a look at where that paint finishes, see if there's any kind of little smudges or marks. No, it's an absolute perfect circle. And that even extends into the centre of the cue. You can see the threads being so perfectly cut into the centre there. Again, absolutely perfect. And really the attention to detail that we have with this cue for the price that we're spending is really astounding. And another feature that stood out to me was the fact that we have the engraved logo here on the base of the shaft, which again, that's very, very well done. But more importantly, as you follow that logo down through the cue, you'll see that it lines up perfectly with the centre of our artwork, goes all the way through the end Rhino logo. Everything, as you look down the cue, is in perfect alignment. So to see these kind of features on these cues at this kind of price is fantastic. Another thing that I appreciated was just how smooth the finish is that we have on this carbon fibre here. I would say this might be a touch smoother than a standard maple cue when it comes to running this through the fingers or across the bridge. And when you're wearing a glove, it really is super slick. And another thing that I noticed as well was how tight the joint is around the pin. It can actually be quite difficult to screw this together and to unscrew it as well. Now, of course, that can be both a positive and a negative. It's a negative in so much it's going to take you a little bit longer to screw or unscrew your butt from the shaft. But on the flip side of that, you're getting a really nice and solid firm lock when you finally get that twisted into place, because it really does feel like you're getting a solid lock across the entirety of that thread all the way down that pin, rather than having a joint that goes together really, really loosely and has rattle in it until you actually finally get to that little bit at the end where it just tightens up. So from my perspective, I do actually really like and appreciate that fact. It does feel like it's a very, very solid joint. And another factor that people will probably want to know about is this 3D friction grip. When I first saw this on the Rhino website, I thought these were actually little rubber sections that actually protrude slightly away from the butt. Whereas what we actually have here, these are actually moulded in as part of the butt, and then the whole thing is covered in lacquer. And overall, I would say that it is fairly well done. I don't know if it's absolutely necessary. Thankfully, these little bumps, they're not particularly large. They're not sticking out too much. And it might add a little bit of grip, although the butt itself does appear to be quite grippy, so I'm not actually sure if it's 100% required. But overall, it certainly adds a little bit of flair to the cue, and like I say, it is fairly well executed. So overall, without question, what we have here is a fantastic cue with a lot of attention to detail. But were there any negatives? Now, I did really only find one, and thankfully that is quite minor in nature, and it really doesn't affect the performance of the cue in any way. And that comes down to the rubber bumper that we have on this cue. And what I found is this particular bumper, instead of being made from rubber, it's actually made from plastic. So when you place that cue down on the floor, you get quite a distinct thud, and it's certainly quite unforgiving. Now, that's not exclusive to this particular cue. Lots of cue manufacturers have varying hardnesses of these rubber bumpers, and personally I prefer a softer one. I find it a bit more forgiving when you're not taking your shots and you're waiting to take your turn on the table. Whereas the one that we have here, like I said, this is made from solid plastic. Very, very unforgiving. But in all reality, that's the only negative that I could pick up on the entire cue. So let's go ahead and give it its score for quality. Perhaps the most astonishing thing about the Nebula 2 is the attention to detail. It's immediately apparent when you get the cue in your hand that the quality is indeed in the details. And while some of the features of the cue may not appeal to everyone, there's simply no questioning that everything that is on the cue is of an extremely high quality and belies its comparatively low price tag, scoring the Nebula 2 a perfect 5 out of 5 stars for outstanding quality at an affordable price. Rhino are probably best known for offering carbon fiber cues and shafts at affordable prices, and they're definitely one of the leaders in this category. But it is an increasingly competitive category, and one that seems to be strewn with offerings of various quality standards. You can buy cheaper carbon fiber cues, mainly from brands you've likely never heard of. But there are some standouts, including Crical, which you can pick up for around half of the price of the Rhino. But not all carbon fiber cues are made equal, and at that price it's likely that serious corners have been cut. But we'll find out soon as our Crical Review Cue is on its way. And when it comes to the large USA-based manufacturers, they have no real offerings to compete directly with the Rhino lineup, with none of them offering carbon fibre options on their budget brands, such as Valhalla, Lucky or Star. But perhaps the biggest direct rival for the Rhino Nebula 2 would be offerings from Konllen, who are generally well respected for their quality and have various options in the same price bracket as the Rhino. But for its combination of outstanding attention to detail and quality, along with sensible budget pricing, the Rhino clearly offers great value for money, scoring it full marks 5 out of 5 for value. So now we'll be awarding the Nebula 2 with its official Average Joe's rating. And this is a very simple process. We take the scores from across our 5 test categories and then we use these to calculate the overall average. And our Rhino Nebula 2 charges down the finishing line with an Average Joe's rating of 4.2 stars. This earns it our most prestigious award, the Average Joe's Sizzler, which is specially reserved for hot products scoring 4 stars or higher. There's a reason why Rhino have taken the market by storm, and with an almost unparalleled combination of quality and value, if you're not on board yet, then you probably should be. And so when it comes to the Rhino Nebula 2, is this something that you should have on your shopping list? Well, the answer is undoubtedly yes. There's a very distinct reason why Rhino have such a good reputation when it comes to these cheaper carbon fibre shafted models. When it comes to carbon fibre cues, when you're talking sub $300 like we are here on the Nebula 2, yes, there are a surprisingly large number of cues to choose from, most of them from manufacturers that you've probably never even heard of. And I must say, having seen a few of those cues, that the quality of them can vary quite wildly. But what we have here with the Rhino Nebula 2 is a super high quality product with outstanding attention to detail, which is probably why Rhino have been so successful within this category. And so in all reality, if you're looking at a carbon fibre cue and your budget is under $300, you're going to struggle really to get much better than what we have here when it comes to quality. Now, if you are interested in buying yourself a Rhino cue, please do remember we will be adding those Amazon links into the video description, not only for the Nebula 2 but for other Rhino models as well. And so if this video has been helpful for you and you are looking to buy one of these, please be sure to help support what we do here at Average Joe's Pool. Please be sure to click those links. Now, before you leave us today, we always ask you to take 1 second out of your busy schedule. At the very least, please be sure to hit that like button for us. It really does help us out. And whilst you're there, why not also click on subscribe and switch on those notifications. That way you're going to find out about all of our upcoming videos. So thank you for joining us here at Average Joe's Pool, and until next time, nobody makes me bleed my own blood. Nobody.
This is going to be a whole lot of fun to listen.